Kindred Longevity Lifestyle Designers. This is Gavin here with secretsoflongevity.com. I hope you've had a wonderful holiday season and had lots of relaxing time. Perhaps that's still going on for you, heading into the new year in the Gregorian calendar. And there's been something that I've mentioned briefly in the past in some videos that I was experimenting with. Kind of have been still feeling it out. In the recent past, I was saying I didn't feel like it worked for me, but my brother actually gave me a gift that has spurred me to experiment with this with a little more regularity, and that's with the drinking of coffee or any kind of coffee beverage made from coffee beans on a daily basis. So he actually got me something called the AeroPress. I'll be demoing it and doing a recipe in a future video, probably the next one after this actually, and I'll link to that once it's up. But for the time being, you can always look that up if you're interested to know more about that. But essentially, there's a lot of health benefits that I've always known about coffee to some degree, but in my view, the negatives outweighed the benefits. And with further inquiry, I've come to the conclusion, or at least the current understanding, that those benefits are very real and very profound and don't quite come together in such a wonderful package as they do in coffee in any other food or any other multiple things that you could consume. That doesn't mean it's for everyone. It doesn't mean that this is something I'm highly recommending or anything like that. It's something that I've been using and I'm quite enjoying the more I use it almost in a ritualistic way. There's a whole process to using coffee, and if you saw my recent video on the poison path, which I'll link to here, you know that, or you would know that there's benefits to these items that a lot of people in the health community traditionally see as negative all around. So this puritanical mindset, this approach to life that is extremely restricted and you could say conservative or restrained, is not always for the best of us. Rarely is it a good thing. We want to be a little more open and liberal with our health approaches and also our life philosophies. So the use of caffeine can definitely be done properly. All types of stimulants can be used quite well. I predict that I'll more or less fall into a routine of rotating stimulants. I don't use them early in the morning because I have a routine I like to do that isn't under the influence of stimulants, which includes meditation and things. But if I get that out of the way, then midway through the day I imbibe on something like coffee, and it makes me much more productive. It doesn't stress me out the way it would if I was using it extremely sporadically. So if I went months without any kind of caffeine and I drank a coffee, I'd be quite jittery and not productive because I'd be unable to focus. But in the way that I'm using it right now, it's been quite profound in the effect it has had on my ability to focus and get things accomplished. It doesn't mean I can't do that without it, but it's just another thing to use in our arsenal of herbs, because coffee essentially is an herb. And I'm going to list some of the health benefits of it. You can always check out the resources that I use to come across some of this information. Most of it's coming from this one article by Ray Peat. It's pretty profound what he's dug up, and he references all scientific studies if you want to look into that in more depth and have more understanding around this. So the first thing I want to mention, this is my own interpretation of coffee. I haven't seen too many people talking about this, but it's essentially, much like chocolate, pairs great with a lot of herbs. So it'll enhance the absorption of whatever herbs or foods, or even superfoods, you consume with it. So by mixing into an elixir or a drink, which I'm going to do that future video on in the next day or two, you actually get more out of those herbs. And even coffee on its own is great, just like chocolate on its own is great. But when they're combined with things, they potentiate the effects of the things they're combined with. And in that case, you can actually combine it with things that might offset the negatives even more, because there's definitely people that can't handle straight up coffee, but do great when you combine it with things that would be a little more calming at the same time. It kind of cuts through the negative jittery effects that can get to some people. So first things first is to cover the major nutrients you're getting from this. I mean, coffee is a pretty basic drink. It's not extremely nutrient dense, But there are a few key things that it's very rich in. One is magnesium, probably the most abundant mineral that you can get from this. And you're looking at 2 or 3 shots of espresso a day, and you're getting about 1/5 of your daily needs for magnesium. So that's not a ton, but if you consider, this is just a small amount of liquid, that's extremely rich in magnesium. I'm not recommending you get your whole intake of magnesium from coffee per day, but if you had 1, 2, 3 cups a day, you're nearly getting a quarter of your daily needs for that. And magnesium is extremely deficient in most people's diets, so this is a significant source if you're getting, again, good quality, organic, ideally fair trade as well, coffee. Then it is also quite rich in vitamins B1, B2, B3, and B5. And depending on the amount you drink, you're getting anywhere from 5 to 15% of your daily percentage of any of those B vitamins for your constipation. But this is something that is helpful for anyone, is the unique soluble fiber that is present in coffee. Much like cacao, interestingly, there's this quality in cacao as well as coffee that bulks up the digestion once it's gone through completely and actually stimulates bowel movement. And that is partly why a lot of people do coffee enemas. It actually works on the liver, getting the production of bile up, and that in turn helps flush out and cleanse our intestinal tract. So the magnesium in there also will do that. People who are deficient in magnesium tend to get constipated. If you have enough magnesium, the smooth muscle action of the large intestine works much better, and that's going to aid in moving the bowels at the times that it's most appropriate for that to occur. So we're going to list off the major benefits that coffee has been found to have through a lot of research. It's one of the most popular drinks in the entire world, so of course there's a ton of research on it. And time after time we see a ton of benefits. It's anti-cancer, so virtually most types of cancers, and that's because it has a pretty profound anti-estrogen effect. So it actually brings in the whole hormonal balancing factor. One of the major cancers it's good at preventing in a lot of studies is breast cancer. It's also protective against thyroid problems. Both cancers and thyroid problems tend to occur in a low progesterone state, especially in women. So when you have healthier progesterone levels, you have a healthier thyroid, which controls metabolism, which controls your body weight. And of course, there's the factor with cancer as well. We want to have good progesterone levels, whether you're male or female, and that's another good reason to be consuming coffee on a fairly regular basis. Coffee has been found to protect against radiation. Coffee has been found to protect us against cognitive decline. This is a big one. The nurses study found over many years, if not decades, that study went on for, that nurses consuming the most coffee had the lowest risk for Alzheimer's, dementia, etc. There's another unique thing that you could see as going either way, and that's that coffee inhibits iron absorption. So if you're the type of person who has a lot of iron, and by the way, iron is a pro-oxidant, so you don't want to have too much of it. It's especially at risk for men because we don't have a monthly period where we shed a bunch of iron. But coffee with a meal will inhibit iron absorption. Of course, you do not want to do that if you're iron deficient, anemic. You want to take coffee separately, quite a way separately from any food that would be containing a lot of iron, because you want to absorb that iron. So that's more valuable for women in many cases, especially if they're in their menstrual years. And in men, that could be a strategy for keeping iron levels from getting too high if you're an omnivore more particularly. Of course, coffee is renowned as a very profound antioxidant. And a lot of people hear this and they think, oh, well, I get antioxidants from all this other stuff. They hear about some unique food that has antioxidants. And the one line that comes to mind was one popular health teacher who was talking about chocolate, saying, oh, you can get antioxidants from heroin if you look hard enough. So why would we eat chocolate for antioxidants? Same thing with coffee, in my opinion, and he would probably be saying the same thing. But essentially, these are unique antioxidants. You don't get the same antioxidants in every food. The unique color and spectrum of that type of antioxidant that's in any particular food is not going to be found in one that is a completely different color. So the coffee beans are rich red. You're going to have a lot of the similar effects that you get from, of course, red wine, pomegranates, and things like that. But it's in coffee, and we can have the best of multiple worlds, where we get those rich red verging on browns antioxidant colors, maybe even some of the similar ones you find in chocolate, although chocolate's more on the purple spectrum. So all in all, these foods are very rich in antioxidants in a very concentrated form. So the more antioxidants, the better, is what I say. But they have to be from whole foods or whole liquids, such as coffee. Another unique factor about coffee is that it prevents nerve cell death. This is really profound in its anti-neurodegeneration qualities, so that can be a factor with its effect on the brain, although it does actually stimulate blood flow to the brain, which would make up for its anti-cognitive decline factors. But it's also anti-neural degeneration in that it helps extend the lifespan of those cells. But it's also doing this to all the cells in our body to some degree in its anti-apoptosis effects. So that's apoptosis is essentially cell death or regulated cell death. There's actually sort of what's known as the Hayflick limit, and coffee helps extend this, or more particular caffeine. A lot of these points I'm talking about are unique to caffeine itself, so other foods containing caffeine may have the same effects. But some of these things I'm talking about are also unique to coffee because it's to do with the whole spectrum of phytonutrients and things that are occurring in it. So this inhibition of programmed cell death is good because it helps extend the life of our cells. There's not much more to it. It does, in fact, also not cause this to occur in the cancer cells that we may have in our body. So that's one fear that people have, but it does not make cancer cells live longer, which would be disastrous. Another benefit is that the making of coffee, and this is more to do with people who live in areas with dirty water or don't actually consume good quality spring water, or if your spring water happens to be contaminated in some way, the making of coffee actually pulls out heavy metals, up to 90% of heavy metals that can be found in water. So areas in the world where they drink a lot of coffee, and even more so than regular water, well, that's not the best thing ever, it does have its one benefit of pulling those dangerous things out of the water, from cadmium to mercury and other things like that. Coffee inhibits blood platelet aggregation, which is basically blood clots, so it helps keep our blood healthy, our whole cardiovascular system. That's well known about coffee. Then, as previously mentioned, the higher progesterone levels, which again are anti-cancerous, in women, this will actually boost libido as well. It does so a bit in men, but men's libido is more closely related to having healthy testosterone levels, which in some respects coffee could improve because it diminishes the excess production of estrogens in our body, and when estrogens cleared out of the way, the excess bad estrogens, you have more room for the other hormones to flourish. Coffee has been found to fight gout, and there's interestingly a very close resemblance between caffeine and uric acid in its ways in which it works as an antioxidant, and it actually helps improve uric acid to be able to be used in ways that it's meant to be used as essentially a purine, and to prevent its oxidation, which is what generally causes the gout-like symptoms. And finally, coffee's been found to reduce depression and the risk for suicide. So there's definitely a lot more to the benefits of coffee. It's endless. There's tons and tons of research. This is just scratching the surface on its potential. Those are all the positives. I'm not going to try and disillusion you. There are some negatives, which I'll talk about in a second here, but just from all those positives, you can see that it's a very wide-ranging herb, essentially, if we're going to call it that. And I don't think a lot of people realize just how wide-reaching it is and its effects. It's essentially an adaptogen. There's a lot of people calling for it to be labeled as that. It doesn't overly help you adapt to things. I'd call it more like a tonic herb. But it does have that effect, and in a lot of people they can use it long-term without negative side effects in that appropriate dosage range. Of course, there are drawbacks, and you have to understand that caffeine is addictive. If you get on it really heavily and you try and come off it, you're going to have headaches and withdrawal symptoms, but they're not as profound as you would see with more illicit drugs. And some of the other negatives are, of course, that it raises stress hormones in the body. It raises cortisol and adrenaline. If you have low production of these, which is very realistic in a lot of people, having a little boost from those can be quite balancing and healthy. We obviously don't want to have high cortisol and high adrenaline all the time, but those aren't in and of themselves bad hormones. We need them. And as mammals that walk upright, we actually produce a lot more adrenaline than the average animal. So if you actually have a job where you're sitting down, you're in an artificial environment, a lot of people run into fatigue, and that's why you see coffee used so much in the workplace. It gives you this adrenaline spike, which allows you to do work that we're not overly designed to be doing, which is sitting in front of a computer if you happen to be doing that, and it allows us to be productive in that. So some people think, oh, coffee, it's unnatural. But stimulants have been used by our species for a very, very long time. Whenever we find it in nature, they use it. You see chimpanzees using stimulants. It's something that exists out there. So it's not unnatural so much as it helps us do unnatural labor. And perhaps at times it's been more accessible to us because of modern cultivation methods. But that just means that we need to be intelligent in its use and be really in tune with our own bodies and not let the enumeration with any one substance to be overpower the recognition of what our body is telling us is healthy for us. In my opinion, probably the most negative side effect of coffee use is it actually increases the deposits of calcium outside of cells. This is not a good thing. There's definitely going to be a balancing factor here. It's not like we're just overflowing all the calcium in our system right outside of the cells and going to turn to stone like a calcified elderly person. But that does mean, in my opinion, we shouldn't be overdoing this substance and even rotating it to some degree to let our body at times catch up and clear out anything that's being deposited. So actually, if you are someone who's a little more advanced in the years or you have arthritis at some point in your life, it might not be the best thing. That really has to depend on what effects you get from it. A lot of arthritis can simply be more inflammatory, but in some cases definitely has a more calcification type of component to it. And in those cases, you want to reduce the calcium being excreted outside the cells as much as possible. And there was one study in particular I was looking at that showed that if you consume more than 3 cups of coffee a day, and of course that's probably going to depend on your body size. I think this is actually just in women, so that's going to drastically increase your risk for osteoporosis, and that's exactly what I'm talking about, the deposition of calcium outside the cell. It's taking that calcium and moving it to be outside of the cell. That's not this whole acid, alkaline, BS type mindset that people try to ascribe to it. It's not an acidic food. It might have an acidic pH, but it's not affecting our bones in that way because of its acidity. It's doing this because of the effect that caffeine has. You could put caffeine into the most alkaline food and it would still do that. And of course, last but not least, coffee definitely affects people's sleeping patterns in some cases. I haven't really had any major negatives. Of course, I don't drink coffee right before trying to go to bed, but even some people, they drink it early in the morning or just midway through the day and it just affects their sleeping patterns for some reason. So if that's the case, you're probably someone that doesn't do well on it and should avoid it. I've always been fine with stimulants. I've consumed tons of chocolate and been able to sleep deeper than ever. If I were to ever run into problems, I would just simply cut back or stop it periodically to see if that was exactly the cause of my lowered ability to sleep soundly. So I hope you enjoy this list of the possible benefits of coffee from a more scientific approach, not this sort of health, community, rhetoric, baseless type mindset that you see so many people unfortunately carry. So I'd encourage people to look at things objectively, let go of bias, get out of this mindset of all things that are stimulants or sedatives or hallucinogens or whatever as being downright bad. These are all substances we've used for millennia. Again, I have that video on the poison path, kind of jokingly talking about those things and where these things have a place in our lifestyles. And realistically, a lot of these things can drastically increase lifespan, as we've seen in some of the longest lived people in the world. Virtually always have some type of vice that they engage in and thoroughly enjoy. So let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Check out the links below if you want to purchase through any of them and help support me. I highly encourage you, if you want to engage in the consumption of coffee on a regular basis, to definitely get organic. There can be a lot of pesticides and nasty stuff used in the production of coffee, but another equally important thing is getting fair trade. Because of coffee's extremely high demand all throughout the world, there's some appalling conditions that have pushed some farmers into complete virtual slavery, and the way that they're working and the meager amounts they work for. So fair trade, certified fair trade is a great thing to go for. That's, in my opinion, something that I feel very strongly about. And I can see that if I was ever out and didn't have access to coffee, I'd simply go without it. I'm very lucky in my area to have a great source for organic fair trade coffee. Definitely consider that if you're going to be imbibing on this substance. So, like and share the video if you feel so inclined with that. I'll talk to you next time. Take care and embrace life without limits.